Go into the world and tell every man that you meet, there is a man on the cross.
A Catholic Take. What you need to know right now. A bold synthesis of inspiration and information. Keeping you up to date on the news and issues from a courageous Catholic perspective.
A Catholic Take with Joe McClain starts now.
Praise be to Jesus Christ. Welcome back to A Catholic Take, a bold synthesis of information and inspiration. I'm your host, Joe McClain, and it's great to be back. Good morning to you. Going to be a good program today, of course. We're going to be diving into the Bishop Strickland story here in just a minute in the headline news. But on the program today, Dr. Joe Pojman is back. 1 year post Roe v. Wade. There are reports that say as much as 25,000 lives have been saved just in this past year. That's an amazing achievement. Where are we now? Where must we still go? And is our nation truly divided on that issue? He's coming up at 15 past the hour to talk about all of those things and more. So stick around for that. And then our good friend Jordan Pacheco is back. Jordan was on maybe 2-3 weeks ago. We were talking about the St. Padre Pio film. Remember the one with Shia LaBeouf that you shouldn't be watching? Yeah, that one. Well, he put out a podcast on his Glad Trad podcast feed talking about his divorce as a Catholic. Yeah, that's painful. And it's something that hits home, I think, all too often with us. I myself am a child of divorced parents, and I'm sure that you know 2 or 3 that are also related to divorce in some way, shape, or form. Having been divorced, parents divorced, friends divorced, siblings. We all know someone. Well, Jordan's going to share his painful story from a Catholic perspective coming up at 30 past the hour. So join us if you can. Lots of stories in the news, of course, to cover. We're going to cover everything and share the show notes with you over on our website at thestationofthecross.com/ACT. But it feels good to be back in the chair. I had 2 days of no power, no electricity last week. We had a storm roll through and blow down all these massive trees. Just one street over, this poor house got chopped in two, basically. And so there was a lot of damage. Took a long time to get the power back. And I'm so glad to Mike Koniger and Jake for stepping in and making sure the show must go on Friday. And I heard it was a good program with some great discussions. We'll have the podcasts on the website, thestationofthecross.com/ACT. Let's pray. Let's get started. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, that never was it known that anyone who fled to thy protection, implored thy help, or sought thine intercession was left unaided. Inspired by this confidence, I fly unto thee, O Virgin of Virgins, my mother. To thee do I come, before thee I stand, sinful and sorrowful. O Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not my petitions, but in thy mercy hear and answer me. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, and now your saint of the day.
Saint Vigilius of Trent, pray for us. Vigilius was born around the year 353, and as a young man he studied in Athens and was friends with St. John Chrysostom. Vigilius's mother and brothers are also venerated as saints. When he returned to Trent, where his family lived, Vigilius was acclaimed bishop by the people, and may have been consecrated as such by St. Ambrose himself. Ambrose was certainly a source of guidance to the new bishop, writing to Vigilius a long advisory letter, urging especially a fierce opposition to usury and to the practice of Christians marrying heathens. Vigilius was successful in converting the Arians in his diocese, and nearly eradicated the last remnants of paganism in the area. Several of his priests became martyr saints at the hands of pagans, leading Vigilius to write a narrative of their acts, and the holy envy the bishop felt for their fate was soon rewarded as well. On June 26, 405, near Lake Garda, Vigilius celebrated Holy Mass amongst some of the last pagan holdouts, and then cast their statue of Saturn into the river Sarka. The furious heathens stoned the bishop to death on the spot now known as Punta San Vigilio. His body was borne back to Trent by his brothers and buried in the church he had built, now Trento Cathedral. He was immediately venerated as a saint, and according to Pope Benedict XIV, Vigilius was the first martyr to be papally canonized by Pope St. Innocent I. St. Vigilius, pray for us.
And now your headline news. The National Catholic Register reports Vatican ordered investigation targets Bishop Strickland of Tyler, Texas. The Vatican's Dicastery of Bishops has completed a formal investigation of Bishop Joseph Strickland and the Diocese of Tyler, Texas, according to multiple media reports. The leader of the Eastern Texas Diocese since 2012, Strickland, 64 years old, has faced criticism for what some see as intemperate social media posts unbecoming of a prominent U.S. prelate, including a May 12th tweet that suggested Pope Francis was undermining the deposit of faith. More recently, on June the 21st, Bishop Strickland criticized a newly released Vatican document that suggests topics for discussion at an October assembly tied to the ongoing Synod on Synodality, including questions related to women deacons, married priests, and calls for greater inclusion for LGBT people. According to a source in the diocese who spoke with EWTN News on background, the apostolic visitation consisted of interviews with diocesan clergy and laity throughout the preceding week before concluding on Saturday morning with a meeting with Bishop Strickland. Bishop Emeritus Gerald Kakanis of Tucson, Arizona, and Bishop Dennis Sullivan of Camden, New Jersey, led the inquiry. According to the source, the process addressed the bishop's social media use, but also questions related to diocesan management. Breitbart reports basketball player who blamed COVID vax for heart condition dies of heart attack at 28 years old. A Dominican professional basketball player named Oscar Cabrera Adams has died of cardiac arrest at the age of 28, according to reports. Adams is believed to have suffered from myocarditis, a disease that erodes the heart's ability to pump blood. Following his death, several social media posts written by Adams were found in which he said he developed myocarditis after receiving 2 coronavirus vaccine shots. Adams says he agreed to receive the vaccines because it was a requirement for work. Cabrera collapsed reportedly back in 21 while playing in the Spanish Amateur Basketball League. However, authorities have not officially determined that a stress test the team required caused Adams' death. Daily Wire reports New Jersey sues 3 school districts over transgender student policies. New Jersey Democratic Attorney General Matthew Platkin sued 3 school districts on Thursday after they enacted policies requiring employees to inform parents before facilitating child gender transitions. The lawsuit alleged that the school districts unlawfully discriminate against students on the basis of gender identity and gender expression, which will result in significant and irreversible harm to students if not enjoined. And those are your headline news. Boy, we're going to be talking more about the Bishop Strickland thing in the after show. Join us if you can. The gospel today comes to us from Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 through 5. Jesus said to his disciples, "Stop judging, that you may not be judged. For as you judge, so will you be judged. And the measure with which you measure will be measured out to you. Why do you notice the splinter in your brother's eye, but do not perceive the wooden beam in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, 'Let me remove that splinter from your eye,' while the wooden beam is in your eye? You hypocrite, remove the wooden beam from your eye first, then you will see clearly to remove the splinter from your brother's eye." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. Haydock's Catholic commentary today said, quoting St. Jerome, says, "Christ does not altogether forbid judging, but directs us how to judge. Where the thing does not regard us, we should not undertake to judge. Where it will bear a favorable interpretation, we should not condemn. Magistrates and superiors, whose office and duty require them to judge faults, and for their prevention to condemn and punish them, must be guided by evidence and always lean towards the side of mercy where there are mitigating circumstances. Barefaced vice and notorious sinners should be condemned and reprobated by all." Close quote. St. Jerome and Haydock's Catholic Bible Commentary. You know what's interesting is how many times have you heard in homilies and friends and family and that coworker and the stranger, "Thou shalt not judge. All you do is judge. You're such a judge. You're a hypocrite, blah, 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 blah." We've heard it all the time. You know what the very next verse is after verse 5? Because it goes from 1 to 5 here. You know what verse 6 says in Matthew's gospel? I bet if I took a poll, you wouldn't know. Verse 6, the very next sentence is, do not give dogs what is holy, and do not throw your pearls before swine, lest they trample them underfoot and turn to attack you. Golly gee whiz, how is one to determine who is a dog and who is not? Who would be, trampling and who wouldn't be these pearls that are spoken of here unless one judges? So the next time you hear someone say, you're not supposed to judge, say, no. As St. Jerome points out, we are supposed to judge, but we're supposed to judge rightly. Therein lies the difference. Haydock's commentary goes on to say nothing more is meant than that we should always interpret our neighbor's actions in the most favorable light. God permits us to judge of such actions as cannot be done with the right intention, as murder, for instance. As to indifferent actions, we must always judge in the most favorable sense. There are two things in which we must be particularly on our guard. One, with what intention such an action was done. And number two, whether the person who appears wicked will not become good, close quote. As we behave towards our neighbors, interpreting their actions with charitableness and excusing their intentions with mildness, or on the contrary, judging them with severity and condemning them without pity, so shall we receive our judgment. It's not that we are not supposed to judge. It's how we judge that matters. Let us be cautious in our judgment and remember that the way we judge is how we're going to be judged. So let us judge rightly and correctly and not just abandon the cause altogether. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. Praise be to Jesus Christ. Welcome back to A Catholic Take, a bold synthesis of information and inspiration. I'm your host, Joe McClain. It's good to be on with you today. Coming up at 30 past the hour, Jordan Pacheco is going to be our guest. He is the host of the Glad Trad podcast, and recently he was on our program to talk about the Padre Pio film with Shia LaBeouf and why you shouldn't watch it. But he also just posted a video on his podcast, and we're going to link to that, by the way, in our show notes, talking about his painful divorce, 50% rate within the Catholic Church. But Catholics say, our theology says, no, we don't believe in divorce. So how do we take that as a Catholic? Well, he's going to share his own experience, his own difficulty, his own pain and suffering. And I know many of you, myself included, probably can relate. And we're going to have that conversation at 30 past the hour. So do join us if you can. But we just celebrated as a country the 1-year anniversary, the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And what a great opportunity to have a celebration, praise be to God. So as soon as I was able to get my power back on in my house after 2 days of being back in the Stone Age, I reached out to our friend Dr. Joe Pojman of Texas Alliance for Life to talk about the 1-year anniversary. Dr. Joe, welcome back to the show. Good to have you back on the program.
So good to be here, Joe.
Dr. Joe, your internet is breaking up on us right now. I'm going to ask our producer, Jake, to call you on the phone, to get you on the phone so we can hear you more clearly, because I think it's important what you're saying. I want to make sure our audience gets the full benefit of that. Jake, please get him on the line there. There's an article out of lifenews.com that says, the headline says, they said overturning Roe would kill women. 1 year after Dobbs, no woman died as a result. It says abortion activists lie and traditional media outlets often parrot their claims without question. They equate abortions with miscarriages. They claim pro-life laws ban ectopic pregnancy care, and they claim pro-lifers don't care if women die. How many times have we heard that? I know I've heard that a ton. In fact, I was just at the Men's March in Albany, New York, with Jim Havens and Father Imperato and a bunch of other amazing men. And boy, we're getting screamed at by some of these people. I'm just yelling these lies over and over again. This article goes on to say, but a simple review of the situation in America since the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Dobbs v. Jackson last June easily disproves the lies. There has not been a single reported woman's death due to state pro-life laws, even though more than a dozen have been in effect for about a year, some longer. And the hundreds, perhaps thousands of women in those states who suffered miscarriages or ectopic pregnancies continued to receive the same medical care that women always have from doctors and nurses. Jake, let me know when he's on the line. It goes on to say on Tuesday, First Lady Jill Biden met with abortion activists at the White House who claimed their state's abortion bans put their lives at risk. Biden expressed sympathy for the women, saying, quote, I know that it isn't easy to relive what you're already gone through, but stories like yours, how we shed light how we shed light on the cruel and devastating consequences of those bans, close quote. That's the Catholic president, Joe Biden. Going on to say Vice President Kamala Harris made a similar claim in an interview Tuesday with MSNBC host Joy Reid, falsely asserting that pro-life laws ban medical care for women suffering miscarriages and other complications during pregnancy. Interestingly, a pro-abortion doctor admitted in the very same interview that pro-life laws do give doctors the authority to make that decision if it's a life-threatening situation. Many other celebrities and doctors, politicians, and media outlets also have prompted or promoted false claims about pro-life laws. But the evidence is clear that pro-life laws protect both mothers and unborn babies. You know what I love about the stories in these circumstances is the reality is they can lie all they want. But I think America more and more has been coming to the realization that you're taking a life, that it's not just a clump of tissue. You can't just pretend as though you can write this thing off, as though you can take a life just because it's, the whole my body, my choice routine, that mantra. It's not your body. The baby has its own body. Its body is the one being murdered. And there are severe consequences at stake as a result of that. Jake, do we have Dr. Pojman back on the line?
Not just yet, Joe. About to.
Dr. Joe Pojman is the executive director for the Texas Alliance for Life. And what he's doing in Texas is an amazing thing. And one of the reasons why I brought him on to talk about what he's doing in Texas, this post-Roe v. Wade world we live in, praise be to God, is America seems to be more and more divided over the issue. And the Guttmacher Institute, not a fan of the Guttmacher Institute, by the way, but nonetheless, they have an article out. They have some statistics 1 year after the end of Roe v. Wade, a map detailing where the states are in relation to abortion bans. Now, on this map, it's, color-coded. Blue is the most abortion-friendly. And, red or orange is the most restrictive against abortion. And what I find very fascinating is, Oregon, California, New York, most abortion-friendly. They call themselves the abortion, tourism states, abortion destination states. Dr. Joe, are you back on with us?
Yes, I am.
Oh, praise be to God. I'm glad we did get you back. I was looking at this Guttmacher Institute map showing the states and how they fare with abortion restrictions. Texas, thanks in part to your hard-earned work and your staff, is very restrictive. Oklahoma, the most restrictive in the country. 1 year after the end of Roe v. Wade, how is your work faring?
It's different than what we expected, but also very much what we predicted. First of all, these states, unlike Guttmacher likes to say, they're protective states. They're protecting the unborn child and the mother from abortion. And in Texas, things are very good. Like so many of those other states, there's about 13 to 15 states that completely protect unborn babies from the tragedy of abortion. Those states also provide vast resources for women with unplanned pregnancy, and that's not what's being heard. This is a two-sided coin. We protect babies and we protect mothers and families, and that's wonderful. I guess that's great. In Texas, we continue to hold those gains, and that's very, very important. What's disheartening is the states on the coast, many of your listeners live in those states, that have just gone completely crazy and made abortion completely legal up to the moment of birth, in fact, past birth, and preventing laws that would protect a baby who survives abortion. So it's this tremendous dichotomy, tremendous split, but lives are being saved in so many states, and that is wonderful.
Well, one of the things that surprised me, even looking at the Guttmacher map, again, not an organization I love or revere at all, but I'm surprised to see as many states as there are who have restrictions in place. You know, we would wish that they would be as restrictive as Oklahoma or Texas. They're not, but they do have some restrictions in place as compared to Oregon, California, New York, which is where our headquarters are in the state of New York, who are very open and tourist destinations for abortion. So it looks to me, even looking at Guttmacher's results here, that this nation isn't quite as divided as they would have us believe. In fact, it's more pro-life than anything. Would you say that's true?
Yes, I do. That's a good observation. It is more pro-life. And if you look at national polls, there's a vast majority of people who support some limits on abortion. And that basically for reasons that are for generally abortions later in pregnancies. The pro-abortion position, the Guttmacher position, the Planned Parenthood position, is abortion up to the moment of birth. This is the position of our president, Joe Biden. Legal abortion up to the moment of birth. They don't want any safety regulations in facilities, which is very frightening. They want our tax dollars to pay for it. The public rejects that, and that is still good news.
Where do we go from here? There's the House Dems are trying to get the Women's Health Protection Act to codify abortion of the land. It's probably not going to go through a Republican House, praise be to God. But who knows what will happen in the next election. So what is the fight today in a post-Roe world?
Well, in those states like Oklahoma, Texas, the 13 states that completely protect unborn babies, Joe, you are a person with military experience. We've got to hold these gains, and we do that in people's hearts. We do that with building a culture of life in people's hearts, promoting alternatives to abortion, basic education. In those states that are mixed or have pro-abortion laws, we have to educate people. And there's three messages very briefly. The unborn child's a baby worthy of protection. The same reasons we protect a newborn baby who is helpless, we have to protect the unborn child who is helpless. Abortion hurts, not helps women and families. Abortion is very destructive. Number three, each state provides vast resources for women with unplanned pregnancies. Pro-life pregnancy centers, maternity homes, adoption agencies, church-based program. The Catholic Church emphasizes this very strongly. Walking with Women in Need, Gabriel Project, variety of programs out there. That's where we are going to win men's hearts and build that culture of life. And we can then bring all those states that are mixed into a truly pro-life position. The pro-abortion states, we can reverse those losses and bring them back to our side and protect every unborn child, every woman with an unplanned pregnancy from the threat of abortion.
We've seen a bit of a double standard over the past year, for sure, in prosecutions at the DOJ of attacks against pro-life pregnancy centers versus anything happening at an abortion mill anywhere in the country. People like Mark Houck, who faced prison terms, or many others, fire bombings, graffiti, and destruction. Are we going to see that change in the near-term future? It seems our Catholic President, Joe Biden, is very much interested in making sure abortion becomes the law of the land. So can we expect justice?
Yeah, I don't think we can expect justice, not with this administration. They're committed to that double standard. And that's a tragedy. This is supposed to be the United States of America, where we have equal protection for everyone under the law. And that's not the case. The federal government is allowing intimidations and attempted intimidations. Fortunately, our people are extremely committed, Joe. I mean, we're committed, and we're not going to let graffiti. We're not going to let fire bombings dissuade us, because the unborn child and that woman with an unplanned pregnancy are too important. We love them too much, and we will continue to be out there. And the peaceful prayer presence in front of abortion facilities is very effective.
Dr. Joe Pojman, Executive Director of Texas Alliance for Life. I appreciate having you on. I'm sorry about the connection issue. I'm glad you jumped on the line. What you have to say is so important. And I know Texas is under great pressure to flip in the next election cycle. And it's going to be organizations like yours that are going to hold the line. So we're going to be praying for your success. TexasAllianceForLife.org is the website. We're going to link to that in our show notes, of course, on our website at thestationofthecross.org. stationofthecross.com/ACT. Dr. Joe Pojman, God bless you. God love you. Have a great day today.
Thank you, Joe.
Coming up after the break, more breaking news and stories, of course, and then Jordan Pacheco from the Glad Trad podcast put out a very painful and very sensitive podcast on divorce. It's coming up next.
Hear what listeners are saying about the free iCatholic Radio mobile app.
Through the iCatholic Radio app, I have listened to the sermons and teachings several times. The effect has been a deeper understanding of my faith and Catholic tradition. This app has truly been a blessing in my life and has increased my faith.
Listen live or at your convenience to your favorite shows. Just search for iCatholic Radio in your app store today.
Praise be to Jesus Christ. Welcome back to A Catholic Take, a bold synthesis of information and inspiration. I'm your host, Joe McClain, and here are your headline news. Epoch Times reports U.S. officials react to Wagner mutiny in Russia. Top U.S. officials on June the 25th reacted to news out of Russia that the Wagner Group private military company had mounted a mutiny against the Russian state before withdrawing, saying it shows that Russian President Vladimir Putin is weaker within his own nation than many thought. The conflict between Putin and Wagner chief Yevgeny Prigozhin, formerly known as Putin's chef because the two had a close relationship, kicked off on June the 23rd after a long-running feud between Prigozhin and Russia Defense Ministry appeared to reach a boiling point. However, the incursion seemed to end almost as soon as it began, spanning a roughly 24-hour period in which Wagner saw huge gains into the Russian heartland before inexplicably cutting a deal with Russia and withdrawing. Prigozhin was granted amnesty from criminal action for treason as part of his deal to not continue his march on Moscow and has retired to Belarus, a Russian satellite state. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken told CNN that U.S. intelligence is unsure why Wagner suddenly retreated from the heartland of Russia, coming within 125 miles of Moscow, going on to say, quote, "And I suspect that it is a moving picture, and we haven't seen the last act yet," close quote. Some are speculating that this was all intentional to put 55,000 troops in Belarus in an attack on Kiev. I don't know. Anyway, The Blaze reports New York City drag marchers chant, "We're coming for your children." LGBTQ activists marching in New York City's annual drag queen parade chanted, quote, "We're here, we're queer, and we're coming for your children," close quote. Hundreds of these advocates paraded from Tompkins Square Park to the Stonewall Inn in Greenwich Village on Friday during their annual New York City drag march. The parade commemorated the Stonewall riots of '69 when there was a gay rights protest at the Stonewall Inn, a gay bar. Members of the LGBTQ group Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, who mock Catholic nuns, were seen at the event. The drag queen and transgender group sparked Catholic backlash when they were invited to the Los Angeles Dodgers Pride celebration earlier this month. You know, the one where Bishop Strickland led. Praise be to God. Breitbart reports worker sucked into jet engine at San Antonio Airport. An airport worker is dead after being sucked into a plane engine on the tarmac at San Antonio International Airport on Friday night. The airport released a statement that said, quote, "An accident occurred on the grounds at San Antonio International Airport that resulted in the fatality of an airline ground crew member. We are deeply saddened by this incident, and we are working with authorities as they begin their investigation," close quote. As it turns out, this is not the first person to be sucked into a plane engine this year. On New Year's Eve, a mom of three, Courtney Edwards, was ingested into a plane engine at Montgomery Regional Airport in Alabama. Let us pray for the repose of their souls. And those are your headline news. Praise be to God. Hey, can I just give a special shout out to ICR? Last week, I lost my power for 2 days, and that was no fun. But having ICR helped me to stay in tune and in touch with the Station of the Cross Catholic Media Network. And if you're a part of the ICR club right now, just can I just say thank you? Praise be to God. Hopefully you got that message I sent to you. I gave you first crack. My daughter read that poem from St. Therese of Lisieux on the Sacred Heart of Jesus. We played it in a special hour last week, but I sent it to the ICR Club first. You guys had a first crack at it. So I just want to say thank you for being on the team. iCatholic Radio can be downloaded in your app store, iOS or Android. It's free, a great way to listen to Catholic Radio 24/7. Get the live video, the podcast of our programming, and much, much more. Download iCatholic Radio in your app store today and get on the team. We would love to have you here. Praise be to God. You know, I saw a video on the Glad Trad podcast. I think came out late last week, and it hurt. It hurt. I'm going to be honest. It hurt to watch. One, because he's a friend. But number two, because I'm the child of divorce. My parents have been married and divorced several times, actually. Not to each other, but to other people. So I've had to relive the pain of divorce on multiple occasions. And I know that it impacts probably most of us. We either have gone through it ourselves. We know people who have. None of us are immune. And so it's a deeply sensitive topic, but I think a one that is really needed in conversation in the public square. Joining us now to have that conversation is Jordan Pacheco of the Glad Trad podcast. Jordan, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me back again, Joe.
Oh, man. Can I just say to start, I'm so sorry. I wish there was something we could have done to prevent all this, but I know you know that already. And I'm sure you've heard that from 1,000 people. Let me just ask you this way. How hard was it to even turn the camera on and have this conversation?
Yeah, well, it's been about 5-6 months since my own divorce, which is not something I wanted, nor I would say did anything that particularly warranted on my end. So it's just part of the healing process. And I recognize I actually watched someone else's video first, someone whom I'd known in the political space, talk about their own divorce. And that kind of inspired me to want to finally engage in the process of talking about my own and doing it in an honest way, and hopefully to talk about something that a lot of Catholics unfortunately do have to suffer, and that there's not a lot of people talking about in that way. And I've gotten a lot of people messaging me privately and publicly too, just thanking me and also wanting to share their own stories, some of them which they've never shared with anybody.
So you were very public in your video about what caused or perpetuated your divorce. Tell us about that, because it's I got the sense that you're a guy who prepared well for marriage. I remember when I first met you, you were excited about getting married and preparing for that sacrament. So what happened?
Yeah, I would say that we were both prepared very. I don't think that there will be any ambiguity about what the sacrament of marriage entailed. The long story short is that my spouse was unfaithful to me on 2 accounts that I know of. Only one that she admitted. But the biggest thing is that she told me that even though she really wanted to, she didn't actually mean her vows. So we come from very different kind of backgrounds. And I think that there's a lot of factors, and there are many factors that I can't, of course, ever get into. But essentially, I think that even inside this thing, I think that I had a vision of what marriage and family life looked like, because I had more or less inherited that sort of thing. And it's harder, not impossible, but I know it is more difficult for people who didn't grow up with that sort of vision. And then, of course, you add adultery on top of it and infidelity on top of it. And it's just a recipe for extreme suffering in a marriage. And so she decided to terminate ours. And so that's why we've been divorced since February, but also I'm actually in the middle of an annulment process, because I think that I actually have legitimate grounds for it.
I want to talk about that too, but before I do, can we talk about the stigma of divorce itself, the pain of divorce, and the reality is you must have felt, I have to imagine you felt like, I have to go to work. I have to face my coworkers, and you work at a Catholic institution. How hard was that? How much did how much did your gut actually hurt when you had to go to work the next day and face all of this?
So there was this period, right, where I was living at home. By that I mean my parents' house, and we were trying to kind of figure out if we could salvage this thing or not salvage this thing. And it's really difficult, especially at a Catholic organization, which is a very family organization. we both being pretty, prominent in a little circle there, just being like, oh, hey, how's so-and-so doing? And, oh gosh, you guys don't have kids yet, and all these sorts of things. And so part of also making the video was it's hard to have that conversation a bajillion different times, and it's hard to put on a brave face. And also, especially as far as traditional Catholics go, divorce is, thank God, actually less of a thing than it is amongst the general population of both Catholics and, of course, of this country, but it still happens. And there doesn't seem to be much emphasis for people who have suffered divorce. And so it was extremely difficult, and it still is extremely difficult to have kind of, the secondary and tertiary circles not yet know. And so I hope that there's also a blueprint for people just to deal with it, because part of the repeat of a wound like this sometimes is the fact that you have to balance out between how to be charitable in your conversation about this, and also about the honesty about how devastating that this really can be. And I'm still going through it, right? It's not like I'm years after the point and I can say I'm on the uptick of everything, but I just know that this is part of, in my narrative, what was important to me to kind of demonstrate that I really do want to trust God and start to heal and do the steps I need to do necessary and be a voice for those who never talked about it before.
I imagine that, and I think you talked about this in your actual podcast, the Glad Trap podcast, which we're going to link to, by the way. We're going to link to his video so you can listen to it yourself. It's difficult. I'm going to be honest. It's difficult to get to it first because of how raw this is and the topic and how sensitive it is. But we're going to link to it nonetheless on our show notes at thestationofthecross.com/ACT. But you talked about in your video that you did talk to your priest. And you're traditional Catholic, and traditional Catholics typically are the type that frown on divorce under any circumstances. So I imagine that also was a very difficult conversation to have with your priest. Can you talk about that?
I'm very fortunate because the priest who married us had a background not just in pretty upright moral theology, but also in psychology, actually. So he was very, very empathetic and trying to kind of thread the needle of the permissibility of any sort of separation in this instance, and the validity of seeking something like an annulment and not just utilizing it as a Catholic divorce, right? Because obviously that's a wrong way to consider annulment, right? So it was very, very difficult. I think that great credit to the priest, and the priest in this particular case was the one who knew us best, the one who married us, because there were factors obviously that came during pre-Cana that they wouldn't be an issue that did become an issue. And so he was able to understand us both and talk to us both separately in that fatherly sort of authority. And so I think that I had a great demonstration of the fatherly gift that a priest should have as your spiritual father in this instance. Still didn't make it easy. And I got to tell you, for anyone going through the annulment process, it's not easy and it's extremely extensive. I wish they just locked you in a room for a day and gave you but you have to actually list out a paragraph's worth of information detailing every single aspect of your divorce or your marriage in ways that you've never even considered before. So, and before you engage in this, you need an advocate, which means you need to sit down with your parish priest, and it just becomes a whole thing. And it's not a speedy process, and that's, of course, for the best, but it's certainly a lengthy one.
It's fascinating because whenever I listen to people give an interpretation of Matthew's gospel where Jesus says, you have heard that it was said, talking about divorce, and then they try to, because there's a Greek word there about porneia, the Greek word porneia, and they say in the case of unchastity is how it gets interpreted so often. But actually the meaning is not really about unchastity. It has a liturgical sense to it, sort of a pornifying the liturgy. Pornifying the sacrament is what's the indicator there. And I find that fascinating because I think you said in your video that you had a sort of the reality is, even though your spouse was unfaithful to you, that is not by itself grounds for divorce. That is not grounds for annulment. That is not a reason to end your marriage.
Yeah, this is completely true because these are the words of Christ. It is. I've never been one of those Catholics who's like, this is a hard saying for everything. This one's a tough one, but these are the words of Christ. I have no desire to change them. Also because that's not the main reason behind. Now, whether or not this would have resulted in a sort of separation, I was on the path of really wanting to work through the first count that I knew of, at least. But it just wasn't going to be in the cards for me. But yeah, I just had actually a conversation with a friend who is a revert back to Catholicism on this very point as I was telling him my story. And I have a good Calvinist buddy. And when I told him, he seemed very, very surprised that Catholics don't think that adultery, right, is a ground for divorce. And so this whole process has not made me more hostile to marriage. If anything, actually, it's strengthened my very great belief and respect for the sacrament. And because I see that how difficult it obviously is, even in good marriages, to keep intact. But I certainly understand why God is so serious about protecting it, because obviously without kind of this grace of the sacrament, the whole world sort of falls apart. And without these two people engaging in it seriously, an entire marriage can fall apart. If it's not 100-100, it's not going to work.
Hold that thought right there. Jordan Pacheco from the Glad Trad podcast talking about the pain and suffering and the reality of divorce. But here's the problem. Many Catholics will just simply rationalize and ignore church teaching. We'll talk about that coming up right after this very quick break. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Praise be to Jesus Christ. Welcome back to A Catholic Take, a bold synthesis of information and inspiration. I'm your host, Joe McClain. So good to be on with you. Praise be to God. Coming up at the top of the hour, we'll say goodbye to the radio and stay on for the after show with our insiders on the live video feed for a half hour. We'll talk about whatever you want, but I kind of want to talk about Bishop Strickland. But you get to decide the agenda. So that's coming up in the after show. Stick around if you can. You can find the link or the live video feed and everything on our website, including show notes that we're going to link to everything we've talked about today over at thestationofthecross.com/ACT. That's thestationofthecross.com/ACT. Jordan Pacheco is our guest. He is he's the host of the Glad Trad podcast. I was going to say co-host, Jordan, but you and I both know. Okay, that other guy, Rudy, whatever his name is.
Pass along to Rudy, I promise.
Rudolfo something or other. He's never there.
Never heard of him.
Okay. So it is your show. Let's just be honest with you. I'm teasing. I'm Rudy Carlos. I'm teasing. Anyway, a very powerful conversation you were having on your podcast this last week about your divorce. Now, one of the things that I want to bring up, that because I've gone through divorce through my parents, and I know how painful it is. I made a documentary film that addressed it, as a matter of fact. But I see a lot of Catholics begin to rationalize when things happen to them personally. For instance, whether it's divorce, all of a sudden they go from, I believe what the church teaches, to the church is somehow, teaching is somehow not applicable to their situation. I've seen that. Similarly, I see that with they have children who come out of the closet and they say they're gay. And all of a sudden, the church is wrong about his teaching on human sexuality and the dignity of mankind, kind of a thing. We rationalize to make ourselves feel better about our circumstances. Have you been struggling with that yourself in your own circumstances? Where are you on the slippery slope?
Yeah, well, I'll be honest. I think that if it wasn't for the fact that the main reason for my divorce and my annulment, which is more important to me, is not because of accounts of infidelity or why is this happening to me, but is because of the words of my own spouse. And also the second fact that we don't have children. I feel like I'm taking this better, and I certainly haven't challenged or have any desire to challenge the church's teachings, obviously, because I want to be a Catholic in good standing. That's all that's going to be left at the end of the day. I would say that I find a lot of Catholics who find themselves in these sort of positions. It's important to remember, at least in the case of divorce, that especially for one whom, because no fault divorce is a BS term, by the way. But I find that a lot of Catholics who might have this inflicted upon them, they're victims of something, and I find a lot of them are suffering. And so I think a very gentle approach to this, both safeguarding the authenticity of sacramental marriage, while at the same time just walking with people who never thought this was going to happen in their life, is the absolute proper sort of approach that kind of keeps people from rationalizing and therefore wanting to change church teaching, as we're seeing in up to papal documents now, unfortunately. But it also is going to make sure that the authenticity of good sacramental marriage is preserved, and that at the end of the day is what this whole thing should demonstrate.
Now, you felt you have you said it very clearly. You've said it in this conversation already. You feel like you have a strong case for an annulment. Before I ask you what that is, let me ask you, annulments, but from the outside looking in, a lot of non-Catholics are saying, come on, you Catholics, you say you don't believe in divorce, but isn't annulment really just Catholic divorce? What would you say to that, Jordan Pacheco?
Yeah, well, if it's Catholic divorce, the church has a really weird way of doing it because there's a lot of paperwork. It costs more money than a divorce, and it takes considerably more time. Divorce is almost easy. The ironic thing is it's actually easier to get divorced than it is to get married. No, it's not just a Catholic divorce. An annulment, of course, says that a marriage, a sacramentally binding marriage, never took place in the first place. And this can happen for a multitude of reasons. If one or both of the parties are forced into it, for instance, if one of the parties actually lied essentially and didn't the vows that they were taking before, there's a lot of different kind of methods. And so the reason why I'm pursuing mine, and I've talked to not just priests, but I've talked to the archdiocese and everything just to kind of see if this is a viable option, is because, of course, not of infidelity, which Catholics don't believe are grounds for divorce, but is because of my spouse's, unfortunately, my spouse's own words, which was that even though she wanted to, she says, she didn't actually mean her vows. And so I'm pursuing that, as well as just kind of breaking down the entirety of our marriage, the ups and the downs. And everyone says that I have a good case. Now, I in this case, I have to love truth more than my own selfishness, right? More than my own desires, which is a prayer that I hope your listeners will have for me. But that's just kind of the reality of the matter, that sometimes these things are legitimate, and that, again, it's not because I want to change church teaching or weasel out of an unnecessary situation, but because I want to uncover the truth about what might be binding for the rest of my life or not be.
I know I've personally been critical of what seems to be annulments being handed out like candy, at a parade. There's been lots of reports that there's been an abuse in the system of annulments within the church. And in fact, I think His Holiness Pope Francis asked that it be made even easier over the past 5 years of his pontificate, and a lot of dioceses have tried to streamline that process. Now that you're going through it, what would you say to that? Is the process, you sort of indicated a minute ago that it's difficult, that it's costly, that it's can be painful and whatnot. So on the whole, would you say in your experience that you are seeing annulments being given out too freely, or do you think it's fair in the process?
I don't know too many Catholics who have actually gone through divorce and annulment firsthand. So now that I'm kind of in my own circle blazing this sort of territory, I can say that it still feels pretty extensive. I don't know what the old system was, and I'm not saying that it should be obviously handed out like candy. Actually, we're talking about something extremely serious, right? We're talking about the profaning of a sacrament. Let's be real here. Even if it's unbeknownst to one party, certainly, and it may be even possible to be both parties, who knows? But I recognize, I think, in my own process here again, that there are so many Catholics who are going through this who are just trying to pick up the pieces of their own lives. And so I think that we shouldn't let, I think that we need to be very careful, of course, with how the annulment process is dealt with. We don't want to make it like a Catholic divorce, right? Where it takes 5 seconds and you're Gucci and everyone laughs. In fact, one of the ladies in the office for this, she's a very sweet lady, and I think very kind to me when I needed it. But she kind of looked at me and she said, well, would you want to get married again? And I said, well, I'm kind of trying to figure out if I was married the first time. So I'm not just like using this as a get out of jail free card. I really don't want to. Mm-hmm. But I will say that at least I find that the process so far is very involved with your parish, and it's involved with the diocese. And it still takes the lady a year for any sort of tribunal to make a ruling. So I don't know if it's so streamlined that now it means no effect. At least in my experience, this feels about an appropriate for what exactly I'm attesting to.
Let me ask you a tough question. What if Holy Mother Church and her authority and wisdom says you were legitimately and sacramentally married and no annulment can be granted? What do you do then?
Yeah, and that's a possibility, of course. I don't know what the probabilities of everything is, but yeah, that's a possibility. I have to say that I have to live my life essentially as best as that prerogative is. And it also will be easily the toughest cross I've ever had to bear, even probably more so than this one. When you've been married and had a taste of good Catholic marriage, I really do feel sympathy for people. My godfather's in this situation where, unfortunately, maybe not unfortunately, I mean, it just is what it is in God's eyes, right? So there it is. But there's not an annulment path for him, and I want to walk with those sorts of people I'm called to do. Then I'm going to have to live my entire life according to that. And I want to say, okay, fine, like let's just do it, Lord. But I don't know if at every instance that's going to make, because the question of that becomes like, okay, so if you take a girl out on a date, is this infidelity against your spouse? I mean, speaking, it has to be, right? You're married, and it's like, oh man, like I liked bachelor life in my early 20s. I was good at it, but marriage has clearly changed me. It's aged me. It's also made me more desirous for good Christian marriage. And so if that happens, we'll have to do a play-by-play, because that would be a crazy thing. But maybe that is what my path is. We'll have to see. Amen. I hope not, but we'll have to see.
I hope not too, brother. I hope not too. Jordan Pacheco, I admire your courage in speaking out about this and sharing your pain and suffering through that. A lot of people can relate. We're going to link to that at thestationofthecross.com/ACT. God love you. God love you, Jordan Pacheco. We'll see you rest in the after show.